Today's session is about when you're too nice and you get trampled by your clients. And this isn't about, whether you're qualified or experienced. We're going to assume you have the qualifications and experience to do exactly the work that you're doing. This is about the psychology, that sometimes make us devalue our own time and effort, or we really hate to let people down. We have a hard time saying no. I'm certainly guilty of people pleasing all the time, and it can be really tough to tell someone no. So that's what today is about, as well as pricing issues. Before we get started, thank you to this month's sponsor, which is Ingram Spark. Ingram Spark is this month's advertiser in Electric Speed, my free newsletter, and every advertiser or sponsor is also mentioned at the beginning of my free sessions, whether it's a business clinic or a Sunday sermon. So thank you to Ingram Spark. They offer book distribution services, both print and ebook, for self-publishing authors. Go to ingramspark.com to find out more, and this is a service that I use myself. All right, without further ado, allow me to introduce Lorraine. Lorraine was a professional journalist for 20 years in print and TV. She had a very interesting midlife career change, where she pursued a master's degree in archaeology at the University of York. And her fiction that she's now writing ties into that. She has a debut novel coming out this fall, The Solitary Sparrow. And she is a single woman living on a small income. So the issues that we're going to be discussing today are very real and practical, affect her personally, her ability to continue writing and publishing. Writing her books, her fiction, depends on being able to make money as her part-time job as an editor and coach. So when Lorraine reached out to me, this is what she said. She said, I've got the writing craft technique down after many years of writing, but it's the business side that's problematic. I'm a book coach doing development edits, a proofreader, copy editor, etc., Jill of all trades with clients who come to me for help. I tend to shoot myself in the foot, pricing too low, accepting excuses, letting clients off the hook when I should point to the contract and say, it's this way or the highway, baby. And she says, the advice from others, you're too nice. And that's what makes me a great coach, but a lousy CEO. And Lorraine, you also added later on, after I asked you some questions about your situation, you said, I expect all writers to be poor, but want to help all writers at the same time. So if I charge extravagant fees, some writers won't be able to work with me, but I don't want to give it away either. Lorraine, before we get into the nitty gritty of this, is there anything you want to add about your situation or the context of this problem?
No, I think that this challenge, in her own words, completely sums it up. It's an either or situation. Do I do this or do I do that? But if I do this, then is the person going to want to work with me? And more importantly, is the person going to want to pay me? But if I charge too much, then it's the person not going to want to work for me. And then I don't have a way to pay my electric bills.
So is one of the fears that if you charge too much, you're simply not going to have clients or work?
Precisely. Yes.
Yeah. And has that happened to you before? Like, do you have experience with people saying, well, now that I know how much you charge, I'm sorry, I can't do it?
No one has said it in those words, but I think I've gotten some nibbles and referrals from other people, and then it seems that when they look at my website, which has my prices on there, they don't get back to me.
Yes.
So I'm not sure quite what it is, and so I just automatically suspect that maybe I'm charging too much.
Right.
But then I see other people's prices, and I'm like, wow.
They're charging more, you mean?
Yeah. So maybe I'm just going about this the wrong way.
Now, do you feel like you currently work with as many clients as you're able, or do you have room for more?
I have room for more. However, I don't want it to be um, a full-time job that is where I feel that I can't do justice to the client's work, where I'm just rushing through so that I can get finished with this and go to another client.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I'm slow at it. If I'm reading a 500-page book for a manuscript audit, I read through every single word and comma. I'm not going to read the beginning, the middle, and the end. In other words.
Right. Right. Okay. So I'm glad you brought up the website. I'm going to go back to my slides here. I want to first talk about the services that you're offering and how they're described on the site briefly. Certainly we're going to talk about the pricing. For those watching, we're going to be talking about the pricing issues towards the second half of our discussion. And certainly there are ways to raise your prices without actually raising them. And it's by doing less work so that it takes you less time. So we're going to talk about that. Very important to keep that in mind as we look at these descriptions. So my big picture headline or takeaway that I hope everyone will believe truly in their hearts by the end of this is that it's possible to be nice and ask for money, or at least have a profitable business. I consider myself one of the nice people for the most part, except on my really bad days when I get annoyed. And I should be kept away from my email. And I think what we don't often realize is that on the client side or the writer side, they're often relieved if you're able to help handle this conversation for them in a way that's friendly, clear, transparent, that shows honesty. And Lorraine, you strike me as a very honest, transparent person. Like, I don't think you're trying to pull off one on anybody.
And myself that way.
And I imagine probably that same could be said of everyone attending here. I'd like to think I attract pretty honest people to these sessions. So it's nice of you as a service provider, as an editor, to remove that burden and to provide clarity around this, and to also guide the person through the decision-making process, even like, is this worth your investment? So I don't think you have to hide or apologize for, providing a professional service that carries value for people. But granted, much easier said than done, but it helps to be given this, I think, encouragement or reassurance. So to get to the actual services you offer, so everyone's on the same page, you have 3 core areas that you're advertising on your site. The first is book development. So people turn in 10 pages every 2 weeks. The project has to be completed in 6 months, and you do extensive inline comments. And then you have the pricing very transparent. This also includes check-ins by phone or Zoom. And this already raises a question that's come up in the Q&A from Margie about, would taking prices off the website help? And I think that's a fascinating question without a right or a wrong answer. I will say that you will drive more people away in the end by not listing the prices, because people are afraid to ask, or they won't take that step to find out more. If you don't list the prices, if you decide that's the right decision for you, and this is, I say you broadly to everyone attending, then I think you have to be really good, usually on the phone, which becomes important later on. So you have to be even better at the money conversation, I think, and enable and be able to negotiate the right price for the client. So usually you don't list prices on the website when it's all negotiable and it's you're quoting based on the client. I don't really think that's necessarily the direction I would move in, Lorraine, for you. I think this feels like, if you are especially already anxious about the money conversation, or aren't yet comfortable about quoting based on client, that to me, that's advanced mode for freelancers. So I think this actually, putting the pricing transparently, reduces anxiety for you. It sets the foundation. And it also helps you not spend a lot of time on people who aren't prepared to pay that price, one hopes. Has anyone
I
ever
totally agree. Yeah.
has anyone ever tried to haggle with you, like bring your prices down?
No.
Okay, that's good. I know sometimes people get into that situation, and I usually advise hold firm. Hold firm. Although I'll have some remedies later on. If that does happen to anyone attending, I have some proposed solutions for that. Okay.
Okay.
So one thing, this is just kind of a side comment. This is not about, I don't presume to know your business better than you do, Lorraine. You've already been doing this, for some time, and you know what people need, and you know the kind of work that you want to do. From my perspective, writers tend to not meet deadlines. And I'm curious if people really do manage to turn in their 10 pages every 2 weeks. Do they stick to their deadlines?
Well, I am um I am probably doing this wrong, but I kind of listen to what the client needs and what is going on in the client's life. For instance, this summer I had a client who had to stop and take care of grandchildren for a month, and then
Right.
they were also building a house, and it just got very difficult. So
Yeah.
I said, why don't we just come up with some deadlines that you feel you can meet?
Right.
So we worked on it together.
Good. Good. So you've been able to negotiate
Right, exactly.
those life events with people, which I would totally expect that life would intervene.
Oh,
Okay.
sure.
Great. All right. So the next service that you offer is a manuscript audit, which is a pretty common offering. So basically, what people do is they submit their entire manuscript and then you give feedback. And I noticed that you give a lot of feedback. At least, again, this is my this is my subjective take. 10 pages of editorial notes. I'm assuming that's single spaced. That's a lot. And I only bring this up because later what I'm going to be suggesting as a way to raise your prices without actually raising them is doing less of this.
Okay.
So that can and one of the reasons I suggest this is I think writers get overwhelmed with that much feedback as well, and it can induce paralysis. And so
Mhm.
even though they can probably see the value and they want the value, they think they want more, they actually do better with less. So
Right.
that's something to consider. And but again, you know your business, and if people are actually acting on everything you give them, perhaps, or maybe you don't know what they end up doing with it. But in any case, um, it's something to consider. And I think that many freelancers that I've advised over the years, they tend to over deliver because they're worried. They have this anxiety that they need to provide as much value for the money that they're being paid. But it's this paradox where if you provide too much, people actually can't get use out of it. They don't know where to start.
I,
So
that that's very true. I think that's a wise way to go. And you're right. It did backfire with a particular client that I had. She was totally overwhelmed with what I sent to her. So I can see that.
yes, exactly. Okay. So finally, and I think this is a brilliant offering. The third one here is the mini blueprint. And so for those who aren't familiar with blueprint for a book, this is a system that Jenny Nash created, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
She has a book by that name, and it's a really great system where people kind of get on paper the structure of the book, the arc, regardless of genre, which ensures that there's less time spent revising or producing a lot of pages that are just going to get cut in the end. So, this is, I would say, probably the package that people could choose if they really want help, but maybe they can't afford, a full edit, or maybe they have the foresight to do this. Um, so have you had any issues with this one? I mean, I don't see any inherent issues here, but have any problems cropped up with that?
No, I haven't had any, but I know other coaches have because people see something that kind of looks like an outline or homework or an English class.
Yes.
And they kind of go, oh no, I didn't know I was supposed to do this. But once they get into it, I think it really helps them to clarify what it is they want to do. So
Yes.
they see the advantage of doing it.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So moving on, I think some of you may have noticed that part of what you offer with clients is like kind of an initial call, and no money has exchanged hands before
Uh,
this call, correct?
that's correct.
And would you consider it a screening call for both you and the potential client to see if you're a good fit?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And how often do people proceed after the screening call?
Um, I I haven't ever had anybody turn me down after a screening call.
Ah, well, that's great. That's
Right ahead.
great. Okay.
And, and actually, if I'm being honest, it's more for me than it is for them
Yes.
because I really want to put a face to the voice, and I'm just an observer of body language and things like that, and it's just to make me feel better. So I don't think I would want to do something just as a cold call type of
Yes.
thing where I haven't actually met them.
Yeah. I think this is an excellent practice. Two thumbs up. And I agree. It's as much for you as for the potential client, and or more for you even, depending. So it allows you to screen out people who you think, oh, I can already see trouble coming. Um, and if all of those people end up working with you, then it shows that um, also what you're doing on the website or however you're describing the services, all of that is aligning, I think, with the conversation that you're having. So that's just a really good sign. um, and I would suggest to everyone who's here, not everyone has the time to do like the full, like, I think your screening calls, are they 30 minutes even? Is that how long they are?
They actually go to 40,
40.
uh,
Okay.
but that's only because I do the free Zoom calls. And
Right.
they end at 40 minutes.
Right. Yes, I understand. So I think for those who don't currently do screening calls and you feel like it's a time issue, I would say you can definitely go shorter with the screening calls, like 10 to 15 minutes if you feel like you can get it. But it does require being able to get the client to stay on track and focused and not have them tell you their life story.
Right, right.
So you have to come up with some really good key phrases to ensure that the call is productive for you. Like, well, in the 5 minutes we have left, what do you want to cover? Or, that I hate to interrupt you, but we have a limited amount of time and I want to make sure we get to ABC. So you have to have those phrases handy. B is asking, how do you nicely turn down a potentially troublesome client after a screening call? I am so glad you asked, B. We're going to have some of those model phrases to use. It's coming up later, so just sit tight and I'll tell you what to say. Now, before we get there, I want to show you this marvelous resource from Elise Bennon of Marketing Mentor. This is someone I've known for 20 years now. She started out being a coach for graphic designers, and she's broadened her business to be basically a marketing coach for all types of creative people. And she does these marvelous sessions on how to price, how to talk about money. And if you really want the masterclass on pricing and talking about money, I cannot recommend her resources highly enough. She has books, she has a podcast, she has a website. So go just immerse yourself in her wisdom. She is just marvelous. Okay, so this is one of the resources that she shares where, this comes in really useful if you were trying to negotiate a price during a negotiation, like during a screening call, which I don't recommend for Lorraine, but some of you may feel comfortable doing this. For those of you who do like talking on the phone, especially with a client, and you like to set the parameters or you're quoting uniquely each and every time, this is the sort of question or script that you'll probably want to have next to you. So, you know, she talks about broaching the topic of money early and saying, okay, let's talk about money, and you don't say it in a confrontational way. You can even make a joke about it, like, okay, here's everyone's favorite part, the money. Are you ready to talk about the money? And then you can start asking soft questions like, do you have a budget? What kind of budget? Um, and if they don't have a budget, you can start to like put a framework around it. Well, let's start with a range. It could be anywhere from hundreds to thousands. Or if I said it was going to be 5,000, or if the average client pays me 10,000, what would you say? And they'll either say, oh my God, I had no idea it was so expensive, or, oh yeah, I can do that. And then if you feel pressured or put on the spot, she has this great phrase about, well, how much is a house? It depends on what kind of house you're looking for. So it allows you to gather as much information as you need in order to make the best decision for you. And you should never feel pressured to offer someone a figure on the phone if you're not ready. You can always say, well, I'm going to have to get back to you. Let me give this some thought, or I need to put together a quote, or I need to write down the parameters of what we discussed, and then I'll send it to you in writing to make sure we're on the same page. So again, this isn't about confrontation. You're trying to come to an agreement that's going to work for everyone. It's in no one's interests to end up working together when one party feels like they're overpaying or someone is undercharging. So more communication, more transparency makes this better. Okay. So some simple ways to protect yourself. And I've brought this up especially for you, Lorraine, because I know you've had at least one regrettable case where someone stiffed you. But I think it's just the one case, right? Do you want to talk about what happened?
Yeah, it was just the one. Um, I have contracts which I send out to everybody. And so we were talking about what she wanted and uh, what the price for that was. And I sensed that she, um, you know, I sensed that she was going to have trouble with the money. So I suggested to her that we do one half up front and then one half when it was over. And that way she wouldn't have this big amount that she had to pay right up front. And she said that was fine. So I wrote that into the contract and I sent it to her. And then she signed, I got started, and I read the entire book and I was making notes. And then halfway through, I got a message from her that she did not want to go any further. And I
And she,
was,
and she had never sent the first half. Is that right?
she had sent all of it.
Oh, she had. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I went ahead and just worked on all of it. But when I got that message, my automatic thought was, oh my gosh, I must have done something, or she must hate me, or she must not like what I've been saying so far, or something like that. So I asked her if I had offended her, and she said no, that she just felt like we were, not a good fit. Well, this person was a friend of a friend, and the friend had, made the referral. And so I felt like it was in just a very awkward position. And so I said, that's fine, no problem. And then I started feeling later, I have the contract, and maybe I should have just said, look, you signed this contract and this was our agreement. Um, and and yet it put me in an awkward position. So then I was just beating myself up over it.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I've gotten it right. So you did receive and keep the first half, or you refunded it?
No, I didn't refund it, and she didn't ask for a refund.
Okay, good.
So,
So, but you had completed the job by the time.
right, right.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
already gone through the whole book and had made notes on it. So,
So, what gave you the feeling at the beginning that she might not be able to pay? What do you recall what she said?
a young mom, children at home, trying to work and write, and um, just having just some things that she said. I felt like I've been in that position, and I just wanted to give her a break.
Yeah,
When maybe that was not true at all.
yeah.
Maybe they were living in a huge McMansion, and and yeah, maybe it was me.
Well, if it's any consolation, if it I had been in your shoes, I don't think I would have pushed for the second half.
Oh, thank you.
I'm not saying that you should or you shouldn't have, but to me, that's part of what happens when you're a freelancer, and it's always hard to know if someone is, being honest or not about their ability to pay. More often than not, though, I find that people are being honest, or they are in a difficult position, or their situation has changed. Most people don't want to do that, and especially if you share a common friend, they must feel, or I would think that they would feel embarrassed or ashamed. So then there's just
Well,
avoidance all around.
that I again sensed that when she called to me and told me that she, you know, felt like we were not a good fit. I felt there was something underlying that was like, you know, husband said what, you did what, you spent what, and there was a sense of urgency and panic in her
Yeah,
voice, and I just decided to let it go.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have a feeling it had nothing to do with being a good fit or anything that you did. But, we're speculating here, but in other words, I think it's okay to be nice when you sense that someone is in trouble.
But somebody in the chat has said I never worked ahead of the money, and that was my mistake. I should have done only what was required of me in that first half.
Yeah,
And they're exactly right.
yeah. Well, hindsight is always
Oh
2020,
yeah.
isn't it? Okay. So for just a few, I think, like, key points that come out of this for me is something you were already doing, which is always ask for something up front to ensure the seriousness of the person. And this happened here, so it's not like you did anything wrong. Sometimes it's not going to be 50%, because that could be an insane amount depending on what you're charging, or it could in fact be the whole amount up front. When I was doing query and synopsis edits, people had to pay in advance. And I was able to do that because the demand was really high, and it didn't matter if people were unwilling. I had enough business as it was. So as your services are more in demand, you can tilt the business in a way that really protects you most of all. Unfortunately, when you're getting started or if you're trying to attract clients, this is a harder thing to do, to demand everything up front.
Right.
Um, Certainly the contract, I mean, I hate relying on the contract for anything, and I'm going to talk about why in a second. But in the contract, you could certainly put in language, if you ask for all the money up front or a significant portion, you might agree to refund if the work hasn't yet begun. So, and for people who have a lot of trouble with clients meeting their end of the bargain, I think it's also helpful to bullet out those things and have them initial, just to make sure that they're not just signing at the bottom and not reading the agreement, which I think some people are guilty of.
That's a good idea.
Oh, Allison is wondering if you ended up delivering the manuscript notes before or after she ended the agreement.
I had already sent them to her.
Oh, ouch. Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Ouch. All right. Well, you know next time. You know next time.
exactly.
Okay. So anyone who's been freelancing, even for several months, I think has experienced what I call a client failure, where and it's not even necessarily something where they're trying to be a bad client. It's just life happens. So like for when I saw the service you offer where they turn in 10 pages every 2 weeks, my immediate thought was, I bet those people miss their deadlines. And then Lorraine has to like reschedule all the calls, and
Right.
how annoying that must be. Um, so my tactic for dealing with these situations is, very upfront, even in the service description, like on your website, aside from the contract, just say, this is where people tend to, fall off the wagon. Here's how we treat that if it does happen. And that actually, I think, makes you more attractive as a person to work with, because you clearly have experience, the pitfalls, you have a backup plan when those things happen, contingencies, etc. I strongly encourage everyone, whatever these contingencies are, uh, whatever the contingencies might be, don't just put them in the contract. Put them in plain language in an email that sends them the contract. Discuss it with them in a call. Whatever, you can never over communicate about these things, in my experience.
Mhm.
Which brings me to the contract itself. And you do use a contract, and I had a look, and it's a very simple agreement. There are a few areas I might consider beefing up. Um, the most important being adding an automatic termination clause. Now, you may not have had any issues with this, but I've had issues with this big time. When I was doing longer projects, like that would span 6 or 12 months, the clients would go missing. And it's like, I'm sitting here waiting, like, how do I schedule my time when I don't know when they're going to come back?
Mhm.
And I didn't have a termination clause. And so I quickly learned to add a termination clause that basically says this agreement expires if the client does not respond within 2 weeks, or if they failed to turn in material for 1 month, or whatever makes sense for the
Right.
project. So you might want to consider that for future protection. But it sounds like you haven't necessarily had that kind of issue yet.
No, but that's not to say that I won't. So I think it's a really good idea.
I also like to list deliverables in the contract. And if I remember right, you do this, but just very black and white. It's really easy to tell if it happened or if it didn't. Anywhere you get trampled, add contract language. And here, I'm not suggesting you be punitive. It's just about protecting yourself so that you have a way to terminate the relationship if things go off the rails. Now, I want to say something really important about contracts. By the time you have to point to the contract with the client and say, the contract says the relationship is over. that's kind of the reality of it. When it comes to that, nobody wants to be in that situation. It means the relationship has probably broken down in some way. Because you're now trying to say, but you agreed, and something has happened where no one cares about that agreement anymore. It's not anyone's fault. I'm just
Mhm.
saying no one wants to be in that position where you have to refer back to the contract.
Right.
Um, but if you must, you must. Okay. All right. So now we get to some of those magic phrases that I mentioned earlier. So Maddie and someone else asked, if you have a screening call with a potential client, you don't want to work with them, how do you get out of that gracefully? And these following phrases, I think, work um, even with existing clients where you need to use that escape hatch in some manner. So, I'm sorry, my schedule is booked with other clients. This is for someone who's missed deadlines or has become totally unreliable and it's causing you headaches. I can fit you back in on date, and you make sure that date is really far in the future. The more you want them to go away, the further in the future it should be. There are times when clients will ask you to do things that aren't part of the original scope of work, aren't part of the deliverables that are in the contract. But rather than saying that's not in the contract, I would instead say that's a great idea, not part of our work together, but we could add it for an additional fee. And if it's a conversation and you feel like you're on the spot and you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to say no, say, let me get back to you, so that you have some time to think about it. You're not pressured and you can reason what do I need to do here, and then quote a price. For clients you don't want to take on for some reason after that initial call, you could say, well, I'm so sorry, my situation's changed, I'm not going to be able to take you on, I wish you the best. Even better, here's some other people who might be able to help you. Not that you want to pawn off difficult clients on other people, but maybe they might have a better fit with someone else, and maybe you can help. Another one of my favorites is, this project deserves someone's full energy, and since I can't do that, and you can either provide a reason or not, I would be dishonoring the importance of this by saying yes. So you work in, I don't want to say flattery exactly, but you show like, I know this is going to be an important project to you, and I'm already feeling like I'm going to check out, and that we all know it's going to end poorly at that point. And then finally, I wish I could assist, but after having this call and thinking about it, I'm not the right person, and here are others who can help. So, any questions, Lorraine? Anything that you're looking for more model?
Fabulous. I think I might print this out and put it right up there.
Good, good. Maddie asks if there are any major differences between a service that's ongoing, like meeting with a client every month for a year, versus more of a one-off, like we'll have 2 meetings to construct your business plan. I do think there are differences, and I think for things that do span long periods of time, the contract needs to be more specific. Ooh, doggy. Contract needs to go into those specifics I mentioned, like the termination clause, some of the deliverables. You might have timelines in there, lots of information about what happens if such and such deadline is missed, just so you have all that contingency laid out. I think it's helpful for the client too, because they're usually going to feel bad or wonder if they're going to ruin their relationship if something happens that they didn't expect. And now they see there's a plan for how to regroup. When I did query and synopsis and proposal work, I actually didn't use a contract. I'm not saying anyone should follow my example there. I'm in a bit of a unique situation, but it was essentially an email handshake agreement. When people booked the service and paid up front, they were essentially agreeing to specific terms. And I was comfortable with that. I also had a very liberal refund policy where if I hadn't started work, full refund. And in cases where people were unhappy, I just refunded. Like, it's not worth my time to argue. You're unhappy. Here's your money. I wish you the best. And I realize not everyone can do that, but that's one of the reasons I could work without a contract in many cases, because there was no way I was fighting to keep the money. It's not worth it. So yeah, for things that are very limited and clear cut, I think simple email handshake contract agreements work fine. But for anything long term, definitely I would have something more serious in place. Pam says, can you give an example of contract language for getting trampled? This usually is, it relates to usually people missing deadlines, or like just ghosting you for some reason. And I think mission creep is the other big factor, when people are asking for another round, or could you take a look at this? Oh, here's my query, could you take a quick look? Or and often those things might not necessarily be addressed in the contract. Um, they have to be done informally during your calls or during emails. People might also ask, oh, I need a couple more weeks to pay you, or um, oh, I'm sure in the chat, maybe there's some people suggesting things they get trampled on, which I'll take a look at the end. But those are the things that usually you'll see contracts try to address to protect you. Someone's saying with that first phrase I mentioned, isn't that inviting trouble in the future if they take you up on it? Like the first phrase was, I wouldn't, um, I can't fit you in now, but I could fit you in at some later date. Obviously, I would not suggest doing that for someone you genuinely didn't want to work with anymore. But if someone is clearly in a troubled circumstance and they really can't do the work and they don't have the self-awareness to realize they just need to put the project on pause, reset, and come back later, I think that's where I most recommend it, where someone is just they're not thinking clearly, and time and space might allow them to come back and then do the work that you would want them to do and that you would want to do too. Okay, so let's go back to my presentation. I have a few more things. This is an example of what to say specifically related to mission creep. This relates to graphic design. So, if you feel strongly about these changes, I'm more than happy to make further edits. As a reminder, the original scope of work included just 2 rounds of revision. Any further work will be an additional item. Rates start at such and such. So this is a way to address it, straightforwardly, nicely, but you're not getting trampled. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about pricing. The thing with services, and I assume many people here, we're talking about freelance services of some kind. They're not scalable. Like, you have a finite amount of time. You're selling your time for money. So you have to be really smart about how you price these things. I'm a huge advocate for flat fee pricing, so charging for the value of what you're providing, not charging for the hours. But I realize, everyone has different models. If your model's working for you, perfect. But the fastest path to earning more money is to go flat fee. And Lorraine, you're doing that for the most part. Some of it is, I think, for like 4 to 5 pages, $4 to $5 per page, or like you have a flat fee model in there somewhere, which I don't think is wrong. But certainly that's another place where you could effectively raise your prices if you had a flat fee model. The only caveat here is that the work has to be very predictable. Like, exactly how much time it's going to take you, and you're not going to expend more hours on someone. So you need a good screening process. And you need to know where the pitfalls could be so that you don't take on work that will eat up all your time for that flat fee. Okay. Now, I haven't heard anything from you, Lorraine, that indicates you're having problems with high maintenance clients, but I have found that high maintenance people tend to like cheap prices. So that's one reason not to price too cheaply. Has that been an issue for you at all, Lorraine?
No, but I've heard horror stories from other people.
So have I. Yes, I'm glad it hasn't happened to you.
No.
If you have more clients than you can handle, like once you're turning people away, that's a big red flag that you're pricing too low. But more generally, what I wanted to talk with you about, Lorraine, is package pricing and tiers, to help ensure that you're earning what you deserve. And this, at the same time, can make your services more accessible to people who may not have as much money. So I want to show an example of what I mean by that. Here on this graph, I'm taking the 3 core services that are on your website. So the book development package, the manuscript audit, and the mini blueprint. We've got these 3 services. You can turn them into tiers, with the Tidy Twain package being the cheapest and the Cervantes craft package being the most expensive, and the Shelley Shine in the middle. Usually when you offer tiers, people almost never choose the cheapest tier, almost never. I don't know why that is. I guess it's about the psychology of it. People don't want the basic. They usually go for mid-size or luxury. So you work this in such a way that the tidy twain package, or the lowest priced, is the easiest and the fastest for you personally to accomplish. Now, this is going to differ for every single editor. So in other words, I've put here that you would give written feedback every month or every X pages, but it could instead be a call every month if that would actually be a less heavy lift for you. And it's really your discretion, what you think is easy for you to pull off. I do think going back to when we talked about your book development package and just how much work you're offering to people, I do think there's potential there to have, like, instead of every 2 weeks, every month. But this is really going to be driven by your experience of what people need. There's also the option, as you'll see at the bottom, a custom or build your own package. So if you're worried about turning people away because you're not offering exactly what they want, you can always say, are you looking for something that's in between, or are you looking to add something else? We can build a package that works for you. Reach out. So that way you don't discourage anyone. And then with the mini blueprint, which might have been your most affordable, I don't know that necessarily could have tiers associated with it unless there's often a service or something that people want you to do in addition or quickly after. But often I find that there's often a service you provide that people provide generally that's inexpensive, that's kind of a hook to get them into another service where it's a bigger, more significant commitment once they're comfortable with you. So you could offer incentives there for people, like I'll give you a price break on something else if you decide you want to continue working together. And that's a way to make things affordable for people who might not otherwise have the money. Anyway, let me pause there and get your response or thoughts on what I've said.
Oh yeah, I love this. I think it's just a great idea. I might have to change the name of it. I'm not
Oh
sure
yeah,
about
no,
Twain.
yeah, that's just for fun. It's
I'm
not
just
serious.
teasing. But yeah, great ideas. Love it.
Now, I'm just curious, Lorraine, for your business, do you have a preference for giving people written feedback versus doing phone calls? Do you like both? Because I noticed that you really offer both, and I think that you don't have to. Um, what do you think?
Yeah, and I do offer both. Um, I it's easier for me to put my thoughts into writing. Um, it's like I don't know what I think about that unless I write it down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, but I do get your point about not going overboard on that and having 10 pages when 5 pages would do.
Yeah.
So, and then I just feel that Zoom call is a good way for us to touch base and for me to tease out any issues they might be having or problems about how to handle the mushy middle, for
Right.
instance, things like that.
Sure.
So,
Sure. Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
okay.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to add, and I don't know how much this would apply to the sort of clients you're working with, but something that was often requested of me was, could you get this done quicker? So this was especially applicable to submissions materials because people wanted to submit right away. But there was one point where I had like a 3-month lead time. So naturally people wanted to jump the line. I never offered that, but for people who do find themselves in that situation, this is another easy way to increase your prices without increasing them, is to charge the people who are in a big hurry. And Lorraine, I know that for some of these services, you promise feedback in a month, and I imagine that that's reasonable for you. It's not necessarily a rush. My inclination is to never promise timing until the time that it's something I agree on with the client rather than stating it up front. So that's just something to keep in mind if that would give you more leeway or flexibility in your business. All right, so we're now to the Q&A time. Before I get to the questions, I'll just mention next month I'm going to be doing a Sunday sermon with Suzanne Lucas Gosson, who spent 30 years negotiating book contracts. We both worked at the same publishing company. She actually taught me the foundational knowledge I have today about book contracts. So we're both in Cincinnati. This will be a really fun one, and we're going to try and offer you as much information we can about negotiating on your own when you don't have an agent. So you can register for that through my website. Just go to the Business Clinic tab under online classes. All right, so I'm going to stop the screen share. And for anyone who might have put a question into the chat instead of the Q&A box, now is a great time to rush your question over to the Q&A box. I'm going to go ahead and take a look over here. All right. So Lila has a story to share. She says, I had a client with a co-authored book. I did a test edit. They asked for a schedule since they were both still writing. I created a complete schedule when they were due to me, and my work due to them, it took hours. Then they said they were going with someone else. I was positive they'd gone with me since they said they liked my test and asked for a schedule. What could I have done to protect myself? I was so mad. I had to go wash dishes and mutter to myself, I'm so sorry, Lila. That is, I mean, that happened to me in some of my early days where I would spend a lot of time putting together like the scope of services and the timeline and schedule and so on, and you send it off and crickets. I don't know that there is a lot you can do in those situations. It's something that I categorize under cost of doing business. But if there are people in the chat, people attending who have some advice for Lila, please speak up. I may be missing something that she could have easily done. But often I find that maybe you didn't have to complete quite that extensive of a schedule, but still, I've certainly done that because people need to feel like they understand what they're walking into before they make that first payment. I have seen some freelancers, and I'm not saying you would be able to pull this off, Lila, but I have seen them charge a small fee for like a discovery call, or this process of putting together a schedule. And by small, like, $100 or less. But if you're actively trying to get clients and you're not turning people away, that could be a deterrent that you just don't want to introduce. So I don't have any easy answers for you there, but maybe in the chat. Suzanne says, I offer a tentative schedule and that it's finalized after the deposit. So if you thought you could put together something more big picture, Lila, without spending a lot of time on it, maybe that's a potential solution. Okay. Margie says, be firm about requests for synopsis help or marketing. People often ask for referrals about this. What's the best way to handle it? Margie, I'm not entirely sure what you're asking for. Certainly I'm asked for referrals all the time for all sorts of work, and I keep a resource list handy. I'd be happy to share my resource list with anyone who wants to steal my recommendations. It saves you tons of time because you don't have to write out those recommendations. You can just say, here's my resource list, off you go. But Margie, if you want to like restate the question and submit it again, maybe I can offer a better answer. Liza asks if there's a resource I know of, sample contracts to look at for inspiration. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know of any like floating out around there in public, but I do have a couple of boilerplates that I have used in the past that I'm happy to share. I'm going to put my email address into the chat, which is courses@janefriedman.com. I'm happy to share my boilerplates with anyone. Just recognize them for what they are. They're boilerplates, so you'll need to customize them. I cannot vouch for how well they will stand up in your territory, country, state, jurisdiction. So just realize that the don't rely on these for legal needs, but to help you better put together your own contract. Jamie says, if you have more work than you can handle, you're pricing too low. Or she said, okay, so that's what I said. So the question is, does this apply if someone is booking really far into the future also? I'm booked for over half of 2024, and I'm wondering if I need to raise my rates again because I'm having to turn away project I'd otherwise love to work on. Yes, 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 it applies. 5,000% this applies. You're pricing too low. And congratulations, Jamie. I mean, that's a great position to be in. Suzanne asks, what about add-on features for an additional cost? Yes, terrific idea. Lorraine, are there add-ons that you often are asked about for your own services? Like, are there things people often want you to do that aren't really part of what you are in your current packages?
No, maybe because we would nail everything down before we get started.
Yeah.
But, certainly I want to kind of let them go out into the world. I let them know that I'm here to help them, here to support them. And if they need anything else, query letters, advice for working with agents or trying to get agents, all of that stuff. I've been in the trenches for so long that I'm more than capable of giving them the both sides of the story. The trick would be, I would certainly want to get paid for that. So that's, I think, the time that I would pull out that cheat sheet. And if they want me to do query letters or whatever, and say,
Right.
well, that sounds great. And let me send you an email that has all the particulars in it. And, that way I get a minute, because what I start to do, and this is another reason that I do the Zoom calls, is for some reason on the phone, I just, like I told you, I'm a stuttering idiot. And I think I need to write things down first, or to at least jot notes to myself. And so that's why I do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense. Yolanda asks, what would you charge for rush pricing? I have seen people charge all over the map. I've seen people charge double even for rush pricing. Other times it's more modest, like maybe 20 to 30% more. So I would say it's really up to you and what you think the market will bear. And you can certainly test it and see how it goes. Deborah asks, what do I think are some of the better scheduling services? She's looking for something basic to use with developing a book coaching service. The two go-tos, I think, currently are Calendly. So that's Calendly. And when I was taking appointments, I used Acuity Scheduling, which is owned by Squarespace. I'm wondering if it's even still called that. But in any event, those are the two that I would take a look at. Jessica asks, could you give an example of listing deliverables in black and white? Did it happen or not in the contract? So in the context of Lorraine services, there's the Zoom calls. Did they happen or not? There are the inline edits on the document. Did you send them or not? Any sort of written feedback letter, did you send it or not? Now, you want to try to avoid things that are subjective. So hopefully that'll be obvious to you in the context of the service that you offer. For when I was doing proposal work, the deliverables were the 1 hour call to discuss the proposal, the edited proposal file itself. And then I also answered follow-up questions indefinitely. And that's one of those things I would not recommend for everyone to hear. But that's kind of a deliverable that was, didn't have an end date. So just be careful of those sorts of things. If you're offering those, you need to be super, super cautious if they have no end date. Avoid them, in other words. Someone's wondering about low-cost sample edits. So to put some context around this, freelance editors will often offer a free sample edit, or they'll charge a small fee for a sample edit. And I think either practice is fine. It's really up to you and what makes sense for the demand you have and the sorts of clients you're attracting. For me, when I was doing query synopsis and proposal work, it made no sense at all to do a sample edit. Like a query is only, it's only a page, so I can't do that. In cases where it's just not feasible to do a sample edit for free or pay, you can have hopefully you can have examples of your work on your website, so people can see the nature of what you do. But I do think, especially for long manuscripts, like book length manuscripts, I think it's in everyone's best interests, if not to have a screening call, then at least to do some sort of sample edit for free or pay. Yolanda asks, I don't use a contract yet, so how would you suggest one get started in putting together a contract for clients? Just email me at courses@janefriedman.com. I can send you my boilerplates, and that should get you started. I wonder if the freelancers union, I would be willing to bet they might have some sort of a model contract that might be useful, but I haven't checked their site in a long time, but they have a lot of free resources. Okay. Since we're past the top of the hour here, I'm just checking to see what questions I can get to, and before we really go over too far. Oh, Lila is recommending a resource from Nolo, which is, for those who aren't familiar with Nolo, they have lots of resources for all things legal. And so Lila bought one of those Nolo books and created a letter of agreement for her purposes. And I think, yes, that is a great resource. And thank you for mentioning it, Lila. All right. Before we close out, Lorraine, do you have any other questions? Anything you want to add?
Well, I do have a question for Sarah, who said that she had a $4,000 client back out the day before they were supposed to start. And she says that taught me to always get a deposit. And I think I would have had to do more than just wash the dishes on that one. I think I would have to just clean the whole house. I would have been so bummed. And I'm wondering if she had a contract and what could be done. I mean, or should anything be done? Do you just walk away from that?
I mean, usually that's, again, the cost of doing business. It's really hard to avoid people who walk away. Was that Sarah Chauncey that said that? Or
Yes.
yeah, unfortunately, it looks like she's already had to leave, or else I would turn on her microphone and ask her to comment
Okay.
further. But I know Sarah's very active generally online, and I bet she would be happy to share more of that experience with you and lessons learned, how she's avoided it moving forward. But I think it happens to everyone at one point or another. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't have any good solutions for that.
Well, strangely enough, one other thing, another gig that I have in my life that has taught me a lot of lessons pertaining to being a coach and working with people is a reseller gig that I do on eBay
Oh,
because I love to thrift and antique. And so I just figured, well, why not just go ahead and see what I can do? And I started a little business, and it just gets gets me some pin money, basically. It's not
Yeah.
like I'm starting this enormous business. But I have found that, for instance, I just sold a leather purse that I had no knowledge about, but when I looked it up, it was something that was very expensive that came out of California. And I bought it at a liquidation sale. And so I put the right price on it that eBay suggested, and I sold it almost immediately. But then I got this really nasty note from um, the buyer who said, "You said this was leather, but it's not leather. It's the farthest thing from leather." And she got really, really nasty about it. Well, the purse said it was leather. It says so, genuine leather on the purse. Well, I'm not going to argue with her over that. So I just said, send it back. I'll send you the money back. And there we go, you know. And so that's given me a little bit more confidence to deal with clients I have on the book side of things. It
Yes.
may not be genuine leather to you, but it is to me.
That's, I would say that was very nice of you, and probably goes back to my overarching principle, which sometimes it's just easier to do the refund or take the item back rather than continuing arguing with someone who's not going to be happy no matter what.
Exactly.
Lorraine, thank you so much for joining me today and being, put on the spot about your business and your mistakes. I know that it's not always easy to be that vulnerable, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I've had such a good time, and um, I just think you're amazing for offering this kind of generosity to all of us. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorraine. And thank you all for joining me once again for Clinic. I hope to see you again soon, whether at the contracts negotiation session or at some future session. Have a great day. Bye bye.